It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Welcome back to your feel-good breakfast show, Expresso. So it's the last Tuesday health segment of Women's Month, and today we're joined by our favorite doctor, Dr. Darren Green, to discuss an issue that will affect up to 80% of women at some point in their lives. It's called the human papilloma virus. Now, it's it's one of the most commonly sexually transmitted viruses, and it's not harmless most of the time, but it does have devastating health consequences.
And
Tell us.
already when you hear HPV, it just sounds extraordinarily
Yeah, movie
dangerous.
soundtrack in the
Yes,
background.
yes. So if you have questions, do give us a call on 0214309881. That's what the good doctor is here for. So let's first talk about in what cases HPV is relatively harmless.
Yeah, well, if you consider the incidence, I mean, you're looking at about probably 7 to 8 out of 10 women have HPV, and 4 out of 10 men have HPV. So that means you have the virus present. It doesn't mean that you display the clinical manifestations of it. So what is it? It's a virus that predominantly affects and presents itself with skin lesions, ideally. So everyone associates the different subtypes and certain strains with things like warts. You get butcher's warts, you get warts on your feet, you get warts on your knees, on your hands, etc. Why HPV is coming to the limelight is its association with certain very common occurring cancers, and being Women's Month, cervical cancer being right at the top of the list, and the association of having a preventable cancer in females. So certain subtypes colonize specifically those areas, specifically things like the cervix and the genital areas, and then lead to devastating effects, obviously with the change of cell structure, etc., as a pre-runner and association with cancer. The thing with the virus is, over time, 10 to 20 years is what it could actually take before you actually develop cancer. Oh, wow. So that's why it's important for us to know about it, to know what we can prevent and how to go about that.
So what happens when it doesn't go away? What signs could someone look out for?
100%. So if you think about the different subtypes and where they manifest, genital warts, so you could have warts on your hands, on your feet, etc. Some of them recurring. You'll have people that have them surgically removed, and the roots obviously then just regrow. Often it lives in nerve tissue as well and can cause recurrent warts. Then obviously the association with things like oral cancers, throat cancers as well, that people forget about. Everyone just focuses on cervix cancer. And then, of course, things in males, obviously penile cancer as well as anal cancer, also to be considered. Yeah. So what you'll then see are the manifestations or changes of these skin types. And in hidden places, you don't see them clinically unless you're having yourself examined and checked out. Thus, the importance of women having things like pap smears, for example, at regular intervals, so we can see changes or stress to that those epithelial cells, that specialized skin type, to see if we need to then obviously intervene or not.
Yeah, and of course a very important health issue that we're discussing with Dr. Darren Green, and you can give us a call on 0214309881. So once these symptoms start presenting, is it a matter of waiting until it gets to a certain point of seriousness before you address it, or immediately?
No, so in the case of cervix cancer and pap smears, for example, women should have a pap smear done initially if they decide, or at the start, even before being sexually active. Often a pap smear is done, but generally, if you are sexually active, you need a pap smear done regularly from the age of 30 as well. Women should also be having a look. Remember, the vaccinations against human papilloma virus are advised to be given from as early as 9 years old, because the efficacy of these vaccines are based on the fact that you need to give them before someone has contact with the virus. Remember, not all contact that people have with HPV is from sexual direct skin contact. Sometimes it occurs through the birth canal. When the baby's born already, they can contract the virus and carry the virus.
Wow.
All right, so we'll keep the good doctor here ready to answer your questions, and you can give us a call on this Medical Tuesday, if you will, 0214309881.
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
All right, we're back again with Dr. Darren Green for our Tuesday health segment, and we're discussing HPV this morning. And of course, you can give us a call on 0214309881. Dr. Darren Green was giving us some stats earlier on, saying that 70% of HPV can regress without any...
Without treatment.
Without treatment, which is good news. But we'll talk about the fact that 100%. It is known to cause cancer and how this happens. And we do have a caller on the line right now. Chantal, good morning to you.
Good morning. How are you?
Very, very well.
well.
Thanks so much for your call. What is your question to the doctor?
My question is, doctor mentioned something about warts being one of the sort of repercussions of or shooting out during HPV. My 9-year-old daughter has had warts suddenly erupting from her arm and her leg. I'm wanting to know if this is cause for concern to rush her to the doctor immediately, or if there could be some other cause, or what the story is.
All right. Thank you so much for that call and the question, Chantal, Dr.
And a good question. So don't freak out if you do have, well, lots of people do have warts. That doesn't mean you're going to develop cervical cancer in your adulthood, as I mentioned. But there is an association, obviously, of the cause of warts and the different types. There's different subtypes. There are over 140 strains of HPV.
Oh, wow.
40 of
That's
them are
many.
associated with sex.
Okay.
You understand? So they're 140 minus 40, 100 are not associated necessarily with sexual activity. And I think that's what the public need to know.
Yes.
That there's subtypes that you're born with where you have a wart on your hand and so forth. And I think that stigma needs to be obviously busted.
Yeah.
So understanding that also that certain subtype 9 and 11 are associated with warts, and generally 16 and 18 are the two that are highly covered with the vaccinations, and the two different main vaccinations that we'll talk about. But 16 and 18 being the ones associated with cervical cancer, and then you get obviously 9 and 11. And 6 and 11, which are the most common ones associated with warts. So the vaccine also does help with that. Okay. If you have the warts already, obviously they need to be managed and treated. You don't always go and cut them out. Sometimes it's so small it doesn't affect your lifestyle in any way.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that if someone touches the wart, they're contagious.
Okay.
Yes.
So you need to understand that too.
That's
And
good to know.
To answer Chantal's question, so no need to panic and rush
Definitely
her
not,
9-year-old
definitely
to the
not.
doctor. We're good.
Definitely
Yeah.
Okay.
But now, Doctor, cervical cancer is a huge risk for women. How important is a regular screening, and when should women start going?
100%. So I did mention earlier on that if you've made the decision to become sexually active, even before starting, that's when you should have your first pap smear. And then obviously, if you are sexually active from the age of 30, we recommend that you at least go for a pap smear every 2 to 3 years. And then obviously we need to check. Depending on the results of the pap smear, you'll be advised by the lab report and by your specialist gynae as to how long you should wait before you get the follow-up one. So basically they look specifically at the cell types at the junction between the cervix and the vaginal epithelium, and that then tells them whether that area is under stress or not. And there are many other things, not just HPV, that can cause that area to be under stress and those cells to grow at phenomenal prolific rates.
Yeah. I think just the mere mention of a cancer screening can be very intimidating for a lot of people.
100%.
So what is your advice to kind of soothe those fears and rather promote regular screening, because that's what's important?
Remember what I said earlier about the virus growing very slowly,
Yes.
or the effects of cancer taking 10 to 20 years to develop. You know, that's a long time. So firstly, you'd want to know if there was any risk of you developing abnormal cells in those specific areas. And the screening process is because something can be done about it. We can conquer, obviously, cervical cancer if we detect it early. Even just the pre-runner cells to the cancer, we can do something about, and you can lead a normal life. So I think that's what is comforting.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that, Dr.
That is
Darren
good
Green.
to know.
Yeah. We do welcome your calls once again on 0214309881. We'll have the doctor for one more chat after this.
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Welcome back to your Feel Good Breakfast Show. We're still hanging out with Dr. Darren Green and talking about HPV, what it is, when to detect it, that you need to vaccinate it. But also, Dr. Darren Green, the most fascinating thing for me is you keep mentioning is pap smear. I want to know the relationship between papilloma and pap smear. What is the relationship
That's a
between
good
the two?
association. So human papilloma virus is just the name of the virus, which has nothing to do with the pap smear. The pap smear, the name pap smear, comes from a specific doctor and scientist that was Papa Nicolau. And he actually designed or discovered, obviously, that we can look at what's going on with those cervical cells by doing a specific test. So, and then obviously that's quite interesting. But the papilloma, obviously referring to the virus, which looks like a big cauliflower ball, basically. That's quite important to know.
And just a reminder, our lines are open on 0214309881 for you to give us a call with any of the questions that you might have regarding HPV. So you've been mentioning a lot, Dr. Darren Green, that it can, or the appearance of symptoms can occur at a very young age. Let's talk about vaccination, especially for the little ones, and what parents can expect when they do take their children for a vaccination. How's it administered?
100%. So a lot of moms are so worried about the vaccination programs that are being rolled out by the different health departments. At the moment, it's standard in our country from the age of 9 years, which is grade 4. The vaccination program has already gone through the first phase and second phase for all girls aged 9 years old to receive it in schools. So firstly, adverse effects on giving the vaccination, there's no association, as was claimed before, with things like Guillain-Barré syndrome, for example. And like any other vaccination, there's always an area of local inflammation on the site, around the site. So depending on how it's administered and so forth, you could have a bit of a swollen area that is a bit painful afterwards. Obviously, the health benefits outweigh here the risk in this case. And that's why we advocate that you actually receive it as young as 9 years old, before you are exposed to the virus. Remember that the virus is spread by direct skin contact. It's also spread by intense relationships sexually and so forth as well. So you'd want to get it. So the CDC, for example, advocates people between the ages of 13 to 26 receiving the virus. I mean, it's not the virus, the vaccination.
The vaccination, rather, yeah.
Rather.
Yeah.
So that's important. And I think parents need to know that, they must understand that the vaccination comprises more than one injection. It's actually 3. It's quite expensive. If you're buying it privately, it costs up to 900 Rand. There are 2 main types. The one's called Cervarix, the one's called Gardasil. What's the difference? Well, the Gardasil protects you, obviously, against 4 different subtypes, 16, 18, I think 6 and 11, whereas the Cervarix only protects you against 16 and 18, those subtypes associated particularly with cervical cancer.
Doctor, we've still got you here. One more to go, right? So if you have any questions for Dr. Darren Green, give us a call, 021-4309-881. He's here to answer any of your questions.
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
All right, we're back again. Yes, go ahead.
No,
Martha,
you go ahead.
No, you do.
Still hanging out with the good doctor. It's Darren Green. We like him and we've got questions for him. Your questions have been coming through. But the first question actually I wanted to ask you just before we had to go away was, what is the cutoff date for vaccination? So when you reach 26, should you stop if you haven't gone for vaccination?
Great question. So obviously, if you haven't been vaccinated and you haven't necessarily even been sexually active, you should still be vaccinated. Even if you have been exposed to the virus, HPV already, you should still be vaccinated. And why? Because remember, there are different subtypes. And you might not have the presence of the one that causes cervical cancer, but the other subtypes are associated with cancers in different places. Oral cancers, as I've mentioned, throat cancers. I've also mentioned anal cancer and penile cancer. So that begs the question, you have to cover and think of the other subtypes, and then obviously the choice of vaccination would be important to cover you for the other subtypes.
Yeah. And earlier on, when you did mention that the HPV virus is also present in men, I had to now start thinking about my little boy and whether I should be taking him to get vaccinated. Is it part of his vaccination schedule? Should I expect it in that little book?
Great question, Kat. So it's not a standard vaccination for males or for boys in South Africa yet. In terms of the world, Australia have started vaccinating their boys already, in view of the fact that boys also have. Remember what I said earlier on, is that 70% of HPV can disappear, but up to 20% obviously you can carry it for up to 2 years. So remember, just for people to understand the virus itself, but in boys, definitely the exposure's there, and also they will also need protection against the cancers that they can develop.
What are some of the myths? Because it's such a complex virus, what are some of the myths associated with it, and why aren't they true?
Yeah, so people think automatically, HPV, genital warts, I'm dirty. The first thing they think is sexually transmitted, I'm promiscuous. You can have one sexual partner for your entire life and still have HPV and still develop the manifestations of HPV leading to cancer. So that's why the protection against it and also the screening processes for early detection are so vital.
All right, so let's talk about the precautions that women in particular can take, because we are focusing on women's health
Yes,
during Women's Month,
100%.
with regards to lowering the risk of HPV infection? And any other advice that you might have, Doctor?
Thanks, thank you. I think so the vaccination, obviously, with our young girls and young women, parents need to support them, educate your children, explain to them, show them pictures of the virus, show them what the manifestations are of it if you're allowed to grow. Remember, it's slow growing from 10 to 20 years as a pre-runner to cancer and so forth. And then, of course, you as a parent should also take responsibility to be around for your children going down the line. So don't put off. I know it's easy for me to say. I'm not the one that goes for a pap smear, for example. And I know it's sometimes tough for ladies to actually work their way around that, but it's a preventable cancer. And the process takes approximately 5 minutes to actually have a pap smear done. Choose a doctor, speak to your friends about it, someone that you feel that you can trust, that you're comfortable with. And certainly read up a little bit beforehand about what the procedure entails in terms of it not being so painful, etc. But also understanding the health benefits here outweigh, obviously, the discomfort and sometimes even a little bit of embarrassment for ladies.
Is there a specific type of doctor that you need to go to for this, or can you go to a normal GP?
Your normal day hospital or clinic in the government sector will have doctors, medical officers trained, and sometimes even healthcare assistants trained that can help you with this. And then in private, obviously, certain GPs do pap smears, for example. Or your gynecologist, obviously, could be your port of call if you can afford to go there straight away.
Well, Dr. Darren Green, you certainly are somebody that we're comfortable with, that we trust, that we appreciate very much every single week
That's
for
right.
your time.
Thank you.
And thanks to you two for your calls. We'll be doing it again next week.